Just 1 month ago, Nancy Pelosi made her controversial visit to Taiwan, and now Asia-Pacific countries are beginning to speak out and let their opinions on Taiwan be heard. In this foreign policy article entitled "After Pelosi's Visit, Most of the Indo-Pacific Sides with Beijing," American senior defense analyst Derek Grossman shares how Indonesia, Singapore, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Thailand all issued official statements indicating they will adhere to the One China policy and hope that both the United States and China will exercise restraint in the region. The overwhelming majority of Asia-Pacific nations are siding with China for one simple reason. All of them have traded with China for centuries and don't want to see a war erupt between the United States and China in their own backyard. But as tensions between China and the US continue to grow, it's time to recognize a major flaw in the US government. The United States is too emotional with its foreign policy decisions, and the current administration has a great trouble defining direction. These are the exact words of Dr. Henry Kissinger, who also believes that the US leadership is too obsessed condemning ideas that it disagrees with. For example, the idea that a type of government other than a democracy should exist, instead of negotiating and engaging with adversaries' thinking. Kissinger shares more. "We are at the edge of war with Russia and China on issues which we partially created, without any concept of how this is going to end or what it's supposed to lead to." If the US truly wants to be the leader of the world, our politicians should not accelerate tensions, but create better options for a more peaceful world. If we look at Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, we can see exactly why Kissinger would make these comments. Did Pelosi's visit improve Taiwan's situation, or did it cause more tension and awkwardly put some of America's closest allies in a difficult position? The answer can be seen in South Korea's response to Pelosi. When Nancy arrived to Seoul, South Korean President Yoon decided not to meet with her in person, politely stating that he was on a staycation. When the press asked him why he decided not to meet with Nancy, he simply responded, "It was not in the best interest of South Korea." This makes complete sense. Although South Korea is a close ally of the US, its largest trading partner is China. For example, in 2021, South Korea exported $69 billion worth of memory chips, with over 48% of those going directly to mainland China. Once we start looking at the economics, it's easy to understand why many countries in Asia didn't appreciate the unwelcome visit from Pelosi and the rising tensions in the region that followed. To further illustrate that Nancy's visit was more emotional than strategy-based, consider the fact that Nancy's son, Paul Pelosi Jr., was an unnamed guest on her tour of Asia. Now, why would Nancy have any reason to bring her son on an official diplomatic visit throughout Asia? Well, he does sit on the board of 2 lithium mining companies, and considering that Asia produces over 75% of the world's lithium batteries, I'm sure it was a strategic move for the Pelosi family and justified mom bringing her son along for the ride. If the US continues making these foreign policy mistakes, it's going to hurt the United States in the long term. Let me give you another example. China has been very successful with its Belt and Road Initiative, launching free trade agreements with scores of countries around the world. One of the hottest regions for China's growth has been Latin America, a region that has been dominated by the United States. However, earlier this week, Ecuador announced the country will now seek a free trade agreement with China, joining Uruguay, Panama, Colombia, and Nicaragua in pending such agreements. Currently, there are 21 Latin American countries in China's Belt and Road Initiative, and the amount of trade between Latin America and China has skyrocketed from $18 billion in 2002 to $449 billion in 2021. Beijing's gain has been the West's loss, as China is offering better conditions in terms of investment and deals. This trend only looks to continue as most of these Latin American countries are electing far-left governments, which are more critical of the United States and are more open to engaging with China. But America decided to fight back against China and once again employed an emotional response. In June 2021, the White House announced it was launching the Build Back Better World Partnership, known as the B3W. Essentially, this is the United States' own version of the Belt and Road Initiative. The plan is for the United States government to engage the private sector in America to build better infrastructure projects in developing countries around the world. It sounds good on paper, but here we are 14 months after President Biden's announcement of B3W, and we have no evidence this initiative has even started. To combat and hopefully contain a rising China, President Biden launched the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, also known as the IPEF, in May 2022. President Biden himself described the initiative as writing the rules for the 21st century economy. President Biden guaranteed the 14 participating countries that their economies would grow faster and fairer, but several analysts have been skeptical of this new initiative and even compared it to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which the US eventually withdrew from in 2017. We see two continuous themes from both the B3W and the IPEF. The United States government is all talk and very little, if any, action. A better example of when the US government actually made significant contributions to developing countries is the Marshall Plan. In 1948, following the devastation of World War II, the US government transferred over $13 billion, which is equivalent to $115 billion today, to Western European countries. The financial aid helped rebuild Europe, remove trade barriers, modernize industries, and help increase trade with the United States. This is an example of smart diplomacy, and quite frankly, this is exactly what China is doing with the Belt and Road Initiative, building infrastructure projects with developing countries that will pay dividends for many decades to come. Fast forward to today, and Washington remains divided on what we should do with China. It seems half of Congress wants to find ways to contain China and slow down China's growth, while the other half wants to compete with China in a strategic way that still puts America first. However, for the US to achieve success with its relationship with China, it must remove emotion from foreign policy. Earlier this week, it was reported that the Biden administration is preparing to pass a $1.1 billion arms sale to Taiwan. Let me be clear. This deal does not make Taiwan safer. It does not make the world safer, and it most certainly does not make the United States safer. Since 1991, the US government has launched more than 100 military interventions around the world. Instead of smart foreign diplomacy, the US has engaged in a military first and often a military only approach. We sell weapons to whomever we want, we start wars wherever we want. Meanwhile, at home on American soil, the average US citizen is simply looking for relief and better leadership from our own government officials at home. Jeffrey Sachs, a Columbia University economist, states, "The world is on the edge of nuclear catastrophe, in no small part because of the failure of Western political leaders to be forthright about the causes of escalating global conflicts." Many of you know my story. I'm an American citizen who has lived abroad for the past 15 years and just last month relocated back to the United States. I have a very different opinion of US foreign policy than our politicians in Washington, D.C. The best foreign policy for the United States is to clean up our act at home and become the best version of ourselves. Instead of blaming Russia and China as the biggest threats to the United States democracy, newsflash, they're not. We need to end the internal threat to democracy and become a shining example for the entire world to admire and follow. Unfortunately, the United States is so far away from that, but this has to become a priority for future American politicians. Is it possible? I don't know, but it's also one of the reasons that I'm back in America to do my best to help more people understand these foreign diplomacy mistakes America is continuing to make and hopefully spark some change to help my home country improve our declining reputation around the globe. Everyone, thank you for making it to this point in the video. If you haven't watched my full interview with George Koo, an amazing US-China analyst, we break down exactly how containing China is leading to a weaker America. Click here to watch the full episode, and if this is your first video of mine, make sure that you hit that subscribe button, and I look forward to seeing you all in a future video.